We've saved the best till last. We've got 4 of the country's most outstanding heads here for you in this small, intimate gathering to talk about how to find the right school for your child. And what we'll do is I'll ask each head to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their school, and then we'll have a bit of a discursive discussion about how parents should go about choosing schools. But each school, I think, to a certain extent, has an element of a unique selling point which would appeal to a certain type of parent who might be looking for a certain type of school. So I think that will be an interesting aspect of the beginning the dialogue. And then I'll ask them some challenging questions, and then obviously I'll hand it over to the experts, who are the people in this room, our lovely audience, to ask questions as well. And as you know, those of you who are veterans of today will know that we have a bizarre microphone issue where we have to play around and share with 2 microphones. But we'll get there. We will get there. So let me start with Will Goldsmith. Recently left Latimer, joined Bedales, and has risen immediately to be the acting head, to tell us a bit about Bedales and what its USP is, I guess. See what I mean about the microphones?
Okay, we got there. Thank you, Ed, and thank you very much to everyone for coming, particularly at the end of a Saturday. It's really nice to see you here, and hopefully in our conversations you can get a sense of the flavours of our different schools. I certainly agree with Ed about the variety of schools you've got in front of us. Bedales has a reputation for being a school which thinks about things slightly differently. From our founding, we were founded as, in some ways, a response to the traditional public school approach to education in the 19th century. So we were co-educational from the start. We're a school without school uniform. We're a school where we address each other by our first names, teachers and students. And we take what we would label as a progressive approach and a child-centered approach to education. We have a pre-prep, which starts at 3 years old. We have a prep school, which goes up to 13, and then we have the senior school, Bedales School, which goes up to 18. We have a particular reputation for excellence in the creative arts, but our students go to a very broad range of institutions, whether that's Columbia University to read law, whether that's VW in Amsterdam for geography, whether that's natural sciences at Cambridge, or whether that's fashion at Central College, St Martin's in London. So for us, that sense of exploring a broader sense of what education can be is very important to us. Also, I think another thing which is particularly important to us and our students is authenticity. One of the reasons why we value first name terms between staff and students is we want them to see us as human beings rather than rarefied alien beings from another planet who sit in the cupboard over the holidays and then reappear at the start of term. And that obviously is an approach which we value. We are aware, as with any school, that that is not an approach which suits every child, and therefore, particularly for us, the assessment process we have is one which we spend a lot of time, and it's a residential assessment process. So we spend 3 days with students who wish to apply in order to see them in as much as possible their authentic selves. It's amazing once you have a young person for more than 24 hours, how they suddenly become very much themselves, and we learn about them in the fullest sense, and we find that very, very useful. As Ed noted, I moved down from London. My love affair with Bedales actually started about 3 years ago when I came on a research visit. And I was actually initially looking at Bedales because of our curriculum. And Bedales is perhaps still a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of our curriculum, in that we teach, alongside 5 GCSEs, we also teach 5 of our own internally assessed courses, which are externally moderated. And we find ourselves now very much in the center of discussions on a national level about reforming, particularly the GCSE system. We feel very passionately that the current system is something which has had its time. It needs reform. And we have many people, including even people like Robert Halfon, the chair of the Education Select Committee, asking us about what we do, which is different. So that is something we're proud of, and we're proud to be part of that national discourse. I think I've spoken enough, so I'm going to hand over now, but I'll look forward to getting questions from you a bit later.
Thanks, Will, and very interesting points about the GCSE, although we're not going to turn this into a seminar about the future of GCSEs. That will be the next year's thing, but it is a very interesting discussion. Obviously, me as a former MP would love to get stuck into that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to ask James Wilton, Deputy Head of Repton, to talk about his amazing school. He's looking at me, because the terrifying thing is we only just meet before, and he's looking at me like you've got the wrong bloke. But
No, you're definitely right. Thank you. Thank you, Ed. And thank you, Will, and thank you to all of you. So Repton, I guess, is one of the more far afield schools that you'll encounter today. It is set in some beautiful rural countryside in South Derbyshire. So we are a full boarding school. And by full boarding, what we mean is that you don't have that mixture of boarding and flexi boarding and home away boarding and so on. We are either boarding or day. 70% of our pupils at the senior school are boarders. We're co-ed. We actually are a through school from age 3 up to 18. And at our prep school, which is on a separate site 2.5 miles away, we have about 10% of our pupils board, and you can board with us from year 3, so from the age of 7. I suppose that one of the things that we feel is very unique to Repton is the size of the school and the level of investment that we make in the individualized, tailored pathway through that school. We have a national and international reputation for sport, but we're very, very particular about the way that we look at the school balancing your exceptional talent in whatever it might be. Principally in many areas it is sport, but we also have concert pianists and inventors, and the head of comedy at Netflix is one of our recent alumni, and so on. So we have a real range of pupils, and we want all of them to have a very individualized journey through. Now, that is something that you've probably heard a heck of a lot of schools say, that they are very keen on that personalized approach. But I think that one of the key considerations which is relevant to this talk is actually to do with the size of school that you might think is right for your child. So if you're going to board, I think boarding at a school which is the right size for them to still feel a part of a community in an individually known sense is very important. So at the senior school, where we have those 625 pupils, they're in 10 boarding houses, completely integrated. The 30% of day pupils are completely integrated with the boarders. We don't do junior boarding, senior boarding, overseas boarding, day house. We just integrate everybody and put them in smaller communities where they become very, very well known and very individually mentored by their teachers. All of the teachers at Repton live in the village, which is kind of sounds like a teenager's nightmare, but that is the case. And what that allows us to do is open up the various opportunities that we have really in a very 24/7 way. And that means that living side by side with so many of our pupils allow us to really look after them in that personalized way that I've described. So I suppose if we're talking about the unique selling points that Ed was talking about earlier, it is that sense that because of being that size, but having a real range of facility and very significant high ambitions in sport, drama, music, academics, and so on, it's that which really makes the difference to us. That and the fact that in, for example, little details like our boarding houses, everybody dines together in their house instead of in a centralized cafeteria. So that community building, allowing you to focus on the individual needs of the pupil and their social development as well as their academic and co-curricular development, that, I guess, is the type of school that we pride ourselves on being. So that'll do it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, James. Richard Backhouse, head of principal of Berkhamsted. I think it works.
It's turned itself off. Thank you, Ed. I am Richard Backhouse. I'm the principal of the Berkhamsted Schools Group. We are an unusual kind of school, although there are more schools seeking to copy our model, and I think you should expect to see the number of schools like us grow in coming years. So we are a family of 6 schools. We have a little over 2,000 young people in our care from the age of 5 months to 18. So the maximum sentence at Berkhamsted is about 17.5 years. But because we are divided into 6 schools, we have all the facilities of an organisation you would expect that has over 2,000 young people. But none of our schools is bigger than 500. So the head teachers and the staff will be expected to know every child and every family and to treat everyone as an individual. We have all the benefits of being a large school and the benefit of being a family of small schools. We're also a diamond-shaped school, so between 11 and 16, our girls and boys have no lessons together. And in fact, they study on different campuses, about a 10-minute walk apart. But they come to school on the same buses, they go on trips together, they do extracurricular music and drama together, they do Duke of Edinburgh together and CCF together. but their lessons are apart. So the chemistry that our boys and girls are thinking of in their science labs is exclusively what's going on in test tubes, not in how long they can hold the gaze of a pupil on the other side of the classroom. So we are both co-ed and single-sex. We're also a day school and a boarding school. We're about 90% day, but we do have boarding houses, so when children need to arrive early, we serve breakfast every day, we serve dinner every day, we keep pupils into the evening when we need to. We've even had a parent ring us up and say, I'm stuck in Paris, the last plane has been cancelled, please can you look after my child overnight? So after buying a toothbrush and some pyjamas, we kept a young person overnight in an emergency. We are also a school which is, we would describe ourselves as an all-round school. With the largest Duke of Edinburgh Gold contingent in England, we have enormous range of sports with wide numbers of national champions. We have music and drama to die for, but that is sometimes thought of by parents as a lack of ambition when a school says it's all round, and that's emphatically not the case. In every area of school life, we are extremely ambitious for pupils to achieve the very highest levels they're capable of. So in my time, a 16-year-old completed his degree in the piano before he took his GCSEs. Slightly frightening to think that you can start teacher training before you've got your maths and English GCSE, but it is technically true. We have national players in many sports, and we enjoy the dynamism of combining an all-round education with a relentless quest for excellence in every area. And then finally, we're a very old school, so we were founded by Henry VIII, who persuaded, Thomas Cromwell persuaded him to give the school a charter shortly, about 2 weeks before he was sent to the charter. Founded in Berkhamsted, half an hour northwest of Euston, so very close to London. But we are also very forward-looking, so we give every pupil from year 5 upwards their own digital device. We have an enormous digital education program, and looking at the future, computer science, IT, and developing our pupils for the future is important. We do character profiling of all our sixth form students and all our staff of the sort that corporates do, so that they understand the nature of different characters, the need to communicate differently to different kinds of people. We prepare them for the workplace and not just for A-levels. We talk a lot about preparing children not just for their first job with qualifications, but also their first promotion with dispositions and skills and attitudes that will help them to continue to progress long after they take their A-levels and leave us. I think I've probably used all my time.
You certainly have, Richard, but very well used as well. The only bit we haven't heard is whether you feature in a Hilary Mantel novel, but we're going to come back to that later. Thomas Cromwell. Nobody get that? Now, Andrew, as the master of downside, you did not get the memo that you can only appear on this panel if you have a beard, but that's fine.
And nor do I have any hair on top.
Tell us all about Downside.
Yes, so Downside is a Catholic and Benedictine school near Bath, about 20 minutes away from Bath. We have a great deal of similarities, but also differences with the other schools here. We're about 365 pupils, and that goes from 11 to 18. We're not exclusively for Catholics, but I think that's an important aspect of the school's culture, and imbues everything that we do, if you like, without imposing any kind of religion on people. I think the effect that has is that we want pupils not to compare themselves with other people. We don't want them to feel like there's a hierarchy of talents, that everybody has a place, and everybody is accepted and valued as they are, even when they get things badly wrong. In fact, we actually view that as a moment where some of the greatest learning can happen. And in a community where we have that Catholic culture, that works very well. I think that in line with the other schools here, we have people who do achieve extraordinary things academically, sports, music, and so on. And I think that I would want parents to feel confident that people would reach their potential, and experience shows that they do reach their potential. But I also think that a bit like one of the things I most enjoy watching at school is a school play, where it's far from perfect, and if you spent your time looking for the mistakes, you'd find them everywhere. But actually, the great joy of watching people doing their best and not all striving to be the main part, it's wonderful when, it's wonderful that the person in the main part is the right person, but actually they need somebody else to shine the spotlight on them. They need somebody to be bringing on the stage. They need people in the chorus, and I think actually we want to celebrate, and I think that's how we view it, is to celebrate each individual and recognise them as they achieve their best at their moment. Everybody develops at a different time, so that's very much at the heart of our culture, and a bit like running a marathon. If I run a marathon, I don't expect to cross the line first, but I'll be very pleased that I've done my best, and I think that's what we want for our children, is that they, when they cross the line, they go, well, that's as good as I could have done, and if I want to do better next time, I just have to do a bit more training, and that's the lesson that they learn, and they learn it for life, so that later in life they've learned that lesson. So that, I suppose, is the specific thing that I would say is a USP for us.
Right, well, having just run the London Marathon and definitely not come first, that certainly resonated with me. And so I think the easiest way to deal when you've got 4 high-powered people on a panel is, rather than ask one question and expect 4 people to answer them, is to ask each one of them an individual question, but to try and cover the landscape. So you've got here 4 schools, which if I can, I hope I'm not putting words in their mouths, but each one has, in my view, a sort of defining ethos, if you had to sum them up in one word or whatever. And Downside, I know, as a Catholic school, that's the first thing I think about when I think about Downside. One thinks about Bedales in terms of its progressive attitude, Berkhamsted in terms of the kind of small school ethos, good thing, and Repton in terms of sport. So you think about these. But one question I want to ask, and I'll just ask Andrew to answer this, although I know that everyone will have their own view, but it's just the best way to organise the talk. And I hope I can put this right, which is, when you think about sending your kid to a state school, for example, you often think about the quality of the head teacher that sort of defines, that's why I want to send to school. But you actually think, in terms of a big, well-known private school, you tend to think of an ethos and a character that has been built up over many, many years. I mean, do you think that is fair to say that your parents will be thinking, much as we love you, Andrew, we want to send our kids to Downside because they know about Downside, a reputation that's been built up over many years? Yeah, and that you kind of have to fit in with that rather than the other way around, as it were.
I think so. I mean, I think obviously, our character will have some part to play, but I think there's nothing worse than thinking you're irreplaceable. And I know very well that when I'm succeeded, then that culture will continue. And to be honest, I wouldn't be a very good head if that weren't the case. I think you have to always work with your team, and I think our schools work really hard on ensuring that the culture is not dependent on one individual. And I think that's the great thing about working in the schools that we do, is that's one of the things that attracts us, is that we're attracted by the culture in the first place. We hope to leave it in a better place, but I think we fool ourselves if we think that it's all dependent on us, and that therein lies the route to madness, really, I think.
I think what interests me is that of the 4 schools that we've got here on the panel, all of you are, as it were, although some of you are closer to London than others, you are effectively sort of rural schools, and in that sense parents really do have to choose you. In a way, say a London parent, as I am, sending their kid to a private school in London, I have a wealth of choice and I can go and visit them, and I know if my kid doesn't get into one, they can go to one that's half a mile away. You have to, I suspect, work harder in some ways to get parents to come to you and say, this is the school we want. I wonder whether Will, although Bedales has a very, very powerful, I suspect, pull to a certain type of parent, having been quite recently at London day school, now at Bedales, do you find that is a difference?
I think there is definitely a difference based on just demographics and geography. So obviously Petersfield, the town outside which my school is a much smaller town, so we know that we're going to get a smaller pool of local people. I think one of the things about being a boarding school, though, is that does open up possibility of choice where you move beyond pure geography. A lot of our parents actually, though, do choose Bedales, one, because it's a boarding school, but two, because it's within reach of their homes. We have about between 10 and 20% of our students who are international students or live so far away nationally that they do stay with us as full boarders. But a lot of our boarders are weekly boarders. And that's primarily because they either live locally but enjoy being part of a really busy school, or a lot of our parents, and this may be accountable for quite a few of you here, are actually London parents, especially in the sort of southwestern quadrant. And having worked in Latimer Upper School before, I know how competitive London day schools are to get into. The competition is intense. I think at Latimer it was something like 14 students to every single place. And that kind of pressure you don't find in schools outside of London in the same way. And that means that we have a slightly different relationship. And we spend more time getting to know the students who apply to our school as individuals, which I think counts for a lot. So geography is still important. London is still important. But I think with the boarding element of things, on whatever scale it is, then actually one can actually exercise choice beyond merely thinking about locality.
James, one of the other things about being a London parent is you get told the school will choose the child because you end up applying for 3, 4, 5 schools because they're all quite near, and you're in some ways confident that the right school will find your child. Much harder, say, for Repton. If you've got to make a conscious choice, and presumably at a young age you're not necessarily sure they're going to be playing for England in whatever sport it happens to be. How does that ethos, how does that translate to a school like Repton, which it's a much bigger choice in some senses for a parent?
Yes, no, I would agree with that to an extent. I think that a little bit like what Will is saying there about what happens once you have made that choice to go to a school of a particular type and size and a boarding school where they are going to live side by side, not only with one another but with their teachers, and have that level of engagement with what they individually want to achieve. I think you choose that kind of school because you think that's going to give you more of an open pathway ahead, that it may well be that you come into the school. We had an alumni of ours who went on to captain the Harvard hockey team, having been an England under-18 hockey player and a straight A star A-level student who went off to Harvard to study biotechnology. But she arrived at Repton really enjoying netball, a broad-rounded, had lots of interest, wasn't really sure which way her life was going to take her. And also not the kind of person who was inclined to compromise on any of those things. So she wasn't, and her family weren't going to say, we know what she is, and we've put her into this school to maximize that, because that's actually comparatively rare. So what instead people would do if they're choosing a school like Repton would be to say, I believe that there is enough individualization and enough firepower to take whatever talent my child might have and drive it a really long way and help them to push themselves a really long way because of the amount of individualized attention they can receive. And I think that's really what drives it. Not that you have a predestination about it, but that you're thinking, I want to have plenty of options, and if my child comes in as a sports scholar and ends up wanting to be a leading actor, then that will be a path that's navigated, with plenty of options all along the way. And that's, I think, that balance of things and keeping your mind open to how an individual might develop, that's a real power if you choose the right kind of school which will allow them to do that.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I'm definitely going to invest in that young lady's first company. Richard, can I ask you, you mentioned you were been around since Henry VIII. How much in terms of the parents who send their kids to your school, do you get a lot of alumni, frankly? I mean, a school with a long history, does it become a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that parents will send their kids to your school, or how do you kind of mix it up?
Well, thank you for the question and the opportunity to say that although I have a lot of grey hairs, I have not personally been around since Henry VIII. I think it's a very good question for parents to ask. How many of your former pupils choose to come back and send their their children to you. And I'm reflecting on the answers that have just been given, suggest very good questions for parents. What kind of pupil are you trying to select? Who are your competitors? To paraphrase the last two questions. We find a lot of people do move back to Berkhamsted, and that's because we compete with the other schools that are available for parents moving out of central London to 30 to 40 minutes from the centre of town. So it's not unusual for parents to look at Whitgift, RGS Guildford, Berkhamsted, schools of that nature. So we see parents sometimes who are coming to visit us from central London and looking at property at the same time. Those who've grown up in the area, in Buckinghamshire or Hertfordshire, often are drawn back to that area because they have relatives still there, and I think that's not unusual. Ours is quite an education-rich part of the country, so when parents move out there with younger children, they might be thinking, do I want to send my children to grammar school, to boarding school, or to Berkhamsted? That would be a quite normal set of questions for parents moving out with sort of 3 to 6-year-old children, because they don't yet know the answer to those questions, and that's absolutely reasonable. I think it's worth looking at areas of the country that afford parents that kind of choice.